Bobby Torres of Frightbox recording here to share with you some tips on how you could glue your drum sound together. Now this is a challenge that many of us face. When it comes down to mix time, sometimes your drums can just sound pokey, strange, almost like they're separate elements, when in reality, you really just want them to sound like a unified drum set. A drum set within a room. Okay, so without any further ado, I'm gonna play the audio sample, and afterwards I'm gonna break down piece by piece what techniques I'm using and how I implement these techniques to help glue the sound of my drum set together. Let's check it out. Okay, so that sample was by my good friends at a band called Toy Machine. I will leave a link to their music right within this video's description. So when it's a rockin' song like this, where there's not a ton of crazy double bass or a ton of crazy drum fills, I like to kind of go hard on the parallel compression. And if you're not familiar with parallel compression, it's pretty much a simple concept. It's having a non-compressed sound combined with a compressed sound. Okay, so people do this differently. I approach it in a super simple way. And I'm gonna show you right now how I utilize parallel compression. So right here, I have my kick drum submix, my snare drum submix, my toms, and my cymbals. The reason why they're submixed is if I were to utilize drum samples with my natural drums, I could combine the samples and then bust them to the actual submix. So the kick submix or the snare submix. I don't ever sample replace toms, but all of my toms are coming through this stereo tom submix. And all of my cymbals are coming through this cymbal submix. And my room mics are routed directly to my master fader with no processing outside of the processing that's going on the individual tracks. So with that being said, the way that I use parallel compression is as follows. My kick drum, my snare drum, and my toms are bussed to this drum submix. So just those three elements, no room mics, no cymbals, are being bussed here. This submix right here is actually an exact duplicate of this submix, so it does not require any extra routing at all. It's not like I'm sending this signal here. No, this submix is exactly the same as this. And you can even see the input is drums, the input here is drums. The reason why I do this is it just simplifies things. Instead of using sends for my parallel compression, which there's nothing wrong with, people like to utilize that technique, I just find it's not necessary. I don't have to get really granular with the actual send level going to my drum submix. If I were doing it with my cymbals, yes, I would want to use send so that way I cannot have as much cymbals going through my parallel compression. But the way that I do it, I do not send cymbals to my drum submix, so there's no need to use sends. So with that being said, super simple parallel compression. My main drum submix has absolutely nothing on it at all. And then the parallel compression version, the copy of it, has some compression. In this case, I'm using the SSL compressor. So let's see how much compression is actually happening on my drum bus. Let's check this out. Yeah, so if you notice when I bypassed the compressor, all of a sudden the drums kind of sounded a little weird and pokey. The parallel compression, in my opinion, subtly blends the sound of the kit together, almost in a way where the kick and snare don't sound so separate and the toms don't sound so separate. And in this case, I'm not slamming the living crap out of the parallel compression chain. In this case, it's only about 4 dB of compression, which is not really a lot, but that 4 dB, when combined with the dry sound, really helps glue the sound of the kit together. Sometimes I go a little heavier with the compression. In this case, I wanted this mix to sound nice and warm and open and punchy, so I didn't really compress it too hard. Now I'm using Pro Tools, but you can utilize this technique in pretty much any DAW. And as a matter of fact, I actually have a PDF with instructions on how you could set up this exact chain within your own DAW. There is a link to that PDF right within the video's description. Now on the topic of the drum chain, the other thing I like to do to help glue the sound of my kit together is use some tape saturation. And the way I like to do it is these two submixes, my dry submix and my parallel compression submix, is being routed to almost like a drum master. So these two right here are being summed to this stereo submix. And in this case, I'm utilizing the Phoenix 2 plugin. This plugin has been around since the dawn of time, at least the Phoenix 1 version of it has. Now I am not picky with my tape tape saturation. This is just what I felt like using on this particular day. Sometimes I'll even use just a regular distortion plugin right within Pro Tools. Do not get hung up on the exact tape saturator. It really doesn't make that huge of a difference, especially considering how subtle the effect actually is. For me, it's just that little bit of extra saturation, that little bit of glue that helps kind of unify my drum sound. So I'm gonna play the track back with the tape saturation, and then I'm going to bypass the plugin while it's playing back so you can hear the subtle difference in my drum tone. Let's check it out. So now if you notice, the drums almost appeared to be louder, and the reason why is the saturation kind of compresses the drum sound, but in an analog tape kind of way, where you don't really perceive it as compression. It just makes the sound louder because it's adding extra harmonics and extra excitement to the source, and in this case, the drums. So again, I don't get too hung up on what type of saturation I'm using, what plugin I'm using. I just pick one that I feel like using that day. They all sound slightly different, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not gonna make or break your mix. Just pick one that you have and use it. Again, I like to use the Pro Tools stock one sometimes, but for me, I do not like to get hung up on small details that don't really matter. It's all about the big picture. Okay, so the next thing I wanna talk about that I don't hear people talk too much about, which surprises me, because for me, it's kind of like the lifeblood of my productions, especially my drum sound, is the utilization of room mics. Okay, so in this production, I'm utilizing a left room, mono room up the middle, and then a room right. Now, I just wanna mention this. If you've ever watched any of my videos where you see the studio that I actually record in, my room is far from amazing. It's a smaller room. It's a good sounding room, but it's not this huge, gigantic sounding room. So I have to really get creative in order to make my drums sound big. And the way that I do it is I actually like to mic my rooms close to the ground. My mono room mic actually sits behind an IKEA shelf, which I actually really like because it helps filter out the top end of the cymbals, and it just has this nice bombastic warm sound to it. And room left and room right sit nice and close to the ground, and I try to get as little cymbal in room mics as possible, so it captures more of the shell of the drum kit than the actual cymbal. So that way I could actually get a lot more use out of my room mics, and it's not just a bunch of splashy crap. And also, I keep the mics as far away from the kit as possible. That's another tip. If you're recording in a smaller room, you can make your room sound big in a natural way without having to go crazy with reverbs by miking the kit far away, and in my opinion, trying to eliminate as much cymbal in the room mics as possible. Okay, so I'm gonna mute my guitars and bass and play the drums back, and I'm gonna mute the rooms just so you can see how much they're adding to the drum sound and how much glue they add to the drum sound, and they make the drum sound more like a kit instead of a bunch of separate elements. Let's check it out. Okay, so if you were listening, I'm sure you could tell that the rooms add a lot. They add a lot of size, a lot of depth to the drum sound. And again, I'm not recording in an amazing sounding room. As a matter of fact, I did a video a few months ago on how to mic cymbals, and you can get a good look at what my studio actually looks like. It's nothing mind-blowing, but with a little creativity, I make it work, and you could do the same thing. Okay, so the next thing I wanna do is I wanna show you the exact processing that I have on my room mics that really help glue the sound of the kit together and help the kit sounding nice and big. So if you take a look here, very simple. I have 3 EQs. Let's see what these EQs are doing. Okay, so the first EQ, I have everything rolled off below around 200 hertz-ish, and everything above 5K is completely rolled off as well, like just to remove as much of the cymbals as possible. And a little bit of low mids pulled out. That's for room left. The mono room is very similar. I pulled out even more with a low shelf at around 3K, but the filters are roughly about the same. And room right should be exactly the same as, yeah, it's the same as room left. And if you notice, I have no compression on my room left and room right. And here's my philosophy. I found that when I compress my room mics, I don't really like it much. It might sound cool in isolation, but it actually makes the drums sound smaller. I find that when I leave my room mics really dynamic, open sounding, and natural, they blend perfectly with the punchiness of the direct mics. Now, me personally, I like to compress the direct mics a little more heavily just to get some punch out of them, but if you blend in the room mics that are very nice and natural and not compressed, you end up with this awesome balance that has a nice, natural, warm vibe to it. It looks like I have a little bit of compression on the center room, but let's see how much gain reduction is actually happening on the center room mic. Let's check it out. So as you can tell, there's actually no gain reduction happening on their center room mic. I probably threw this compressor on during mixing and just didn't end up applying any gain reduction to the sound, and I just left it. So in a sense, there is 0% compression happening on my room mics. So for me, that's the secret sauce, is not applying compression to my room mics, filtering out as much of the cymbal as possible, and just blending it into taste with my direct mics. It just gives you a touch of that Zeppelin-esque kind of vibe. So just to recap, some basic parallel compression, some saturation on my drum bus, just to help glue the sound of the direct mics, and utilizing room mics, even though my room isn't huge and amazing. Again, a lot of people like to skip this because they think the room doesn't sound that great, so they don't use any room mics at all, and I feel like it's a mistake. Even if your room doesn't sound that great, take the time to experiment with room mic placement, and I'm sure you'll come up with something that's pretty cool. Okay, so with all that being said, I will play the sample back once more, just so you can hear the drum sound in its entirety with the other elements in the mix, and let's check it out. So there you have it. Those are some of my tips on how you could help glue your drum sound together within your metal or rock production. So I'm really curious to know, what do you do in order to help combat this issue of having drums sound separate? Let me know if you have any recording techniques or mixing techniques that you usually reach for in order to help glue your drum sounds together. Leave a comment in the comment section below, and I would love to hear about it. If you have found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click that little bell icon in order to be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. You can both like and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Links are in the description below. And do not forget to download my free quick EQ guide that contains all my EQ settings that I always return to when I start a mix. There is a link below within this video's description. Till next time, happy mixing.